There is no glory in the death of a chapter. No fanfare. No imperial bulletin recording their fall. Only silence deliberate, layered, sanctioned. The kind of silence that absorbs even the echoes of honor. When a Space Marine chapter collapses, it does not vanish, inflame, or cry. It seeps into the forgotten seams of the galaxy, abandoned by the Imperium it once served, left to rot under the weight of secrets too profane for remembrance. What survives then? Not banners, not statues, only fragments armor etched with heresy, bolters reloaded by hands that no longer know loyalty, and voices carried on broken vox signals that loop endlessly into the void, praying to gods they no longer name. This is not the story of heroes. It is the anatomy of decay, of obedience corroded, of purpose stretched until it frays into madness. Some of these chapters died screaming, others never realized they had died at all. If you hear these echoes, if the silence feels familiar, then follow it. Share what fragments you can. Subscribe not for glory, but for memory, for those who were erased, but not yet forgotten. They called it Station Quran before it was decommissioned, before it became a tomb with airlocks, before the servitors stopped responding and the mechanicus scrubbed it from their rotation cycles, before it became home to Brother Sergeant Alceus, once of the Death Watch, now something else. He doesn't think of himself as stranded. That word implies the expectation of rescue. There is no expectation here, only protocol, only echo. He keeps his armor clean, though the auto-purifiers failed to standard months ago. He scrubs the ceramite by hand using recycled solvent, breathing through a cracked rebreather, humming the first canticle of vengeance. Not because he believes the Emperor hears him, but because the sound keeps his jaw from locking. In the silence, small things become liturgies. The last standing data terminal flickers without logic now, displaying fractured snippets of campaign orders and scrambled kill team rosters. Some are years out of date. Some are impossible. Alceus once read his own death report, filed under a theater he'd never entered. He left it running. It looped 4 times before the picked feed collapsed into static. He saved the data slate anyway, because someone had bothered to file it. Station Curran orbits a dead moon in segmentum obscuus, though none of the current charts record its name. The stars outside the viewing decks do not match any standard navigational array. They shimmer wrong, too close, too slow. Alceus recalibrated his auger 6 times before conceding that they were not drifting. He eats in measured intervals, not for hunger. He stopped feeling hunger 4 months ago. The ration packs expired long before that, but the act of chewing gives shape to time. Time must have shape, or it collapses into the screaming pit between seconds. He learned that when the Vox first began to whisper, at first it was gibberish. Layered sound like multiple voices speaking over one another, some backwards, some screaming, but then it narrowed, focused, not in volume, but in syntax. Words emerged, not commands, not calcines, questions. Double quotes, brother. Why are you alone? He did not answer. Not because he doubted his mind, but because to respond would mean acknowledging a chain of command that no longer existed. He ran diagnostics on his helmet's Vox grill. Clean, power cycling normal. No warp bleed, no hallucination signature. It wasn't madness. Madness would be a mercy. This was structured inquiry. He retrieved the long-range transceiver from the astropathic chamber, 3 levels down. The corridor to reach it had collapsed during a gravitic shunt, likely sabotage from the station's final hours. He walked over the crushed bodies of Skittery and Watchtechs, all fused together by failed teleportarium backlash. He did not record their identities. He did not speak their names. The chamber reeked of old psychic burn. He stepped lightly, not for reverence, but because the floor was unstable. The astropath's throne still stood, empty, but not cold. Something about the air felt occupied, tense, He moved to the console, overriding the retinal lock with his Deathwatch command cogitator. The system shuddered back to life like a corpse twitching post-mortem. And then the signal surged. It was not one source. It was many, interlaced. Some bore Imperial encryption signatures decades obsolete. Others were civilian broadcast bursts from systems long declared lost to warp storms. A few didn't match any known spectrum. He filtered the noise. Let the pattern speak. Over hours, maybe days, the voices began to form shape. Chapters, names, orders, redactions, denunciations, not lies, not heresies, but silence imposed over history, a pattern of intentional forgetting. Alceus began to catalog them, not for rebellion, not for vindication, but because the Codex Astartes once taught that knowledge is the first bulwark, and bulwarks were all that remained. He stopped removing his helmet. There was no longer a reason to. The air was thick with memory. He began walking the station on a fixed patrol route, remapping the corridors as if it were a bastion under siege. He assigned designations to each junction, treating debris as tactical obstacles. At first, this was routine, discipline, but then he began issuing imaginary orders. Gate 6, Squads Epsilon and Theta, intercept. There were no squads, no Epsilon, no Theta, only Alceus. But the act of command filled the void, for a time. Then came the sound of bolter fire, not distant, not echoed from memory, actual rounds. Somewhere near the tertiary hangar, he sprinted, his ancient Mark 8 plating groaning from disuse. He passed blast doors that hadn't opened in years, now unlocked. Warning klaxons flickered in wounded reds. He raised his bolter, powered it for the first time in weeks. Nothing, just dust. Scratched walls. Spent casings that matched no chapter's issue. He should have retreated, logged it, begun damage analysis. Instead, he followed the casing trail down into the subdeck, where oxygen compressors once hummed. Down, through chambers lined with blind statues of the Emperor, their faces carved off during the last revolt. Down into a maintenance shaft that led nowhere. There, on the final bulkhead, someone had scratched a single phrase into the metal, deep, with a combat knife. They still wait. He touched it, not reverently, just to confirm the scratch was real. The metal was warm. That night, he dreamed of an order coming through the Voxa command code bearing the seal of the High Lords. Long obsolete, summoning the scions of Galanir to muster. A chapter purged in M37 for unauthorized PS augmentation. He had never served with them. They were ash on record. But in the dream, he stood among them. When he awoke, someone had cleaned his bolter. Not greased, not repaired, just cleaned, as if in respect. He rechecked the station's logs. No additional life signs, no movement, no power surge. He ran it twice, then shut the cogitator down. He no longer believed in rescue, but he began to believe in reception, that something was receiving, listening, perhaps answering. Alceus resumed his patrols, but now he left the hangar doors unsealed, just in case. The 13th canticle still begins with the words of Gilliman, though no one speaks his name aloud anymore. The chapter that once bore his genocide now refers to him only as the Primarch, who looked forward, as if speaking his name might tether them back to the doctrines they shed like old skin. They do not reject the Codex. They outgrew it. Their fortress monastery was once perched on the windswept cliffs of Meridial Secundus, a planet known more for its storms than its strategic value. What began as a forward bastion became an ideological chrysalis. The change did not come from rebellion. It came from dreams. 3 librarians, all in the same solar week, reported visions, not shared, not identical, but intersecting. A war that had not happened. Battles fought under alien suns against an enemy cloaked in silence and light. Each librarian recorded his vision independently. The records remain archived, inscribed not in parchment or data slate, but into the stone of the reclusium walls, setched by blade, by hand. When the visions were compared, the convergence was undeniable. They described different battles, but the same outcome, a victory that required transformation. The chapter master at the time, Derek Smarn, convened the Circle of Flame once, a war council, now a convocation of belief. Marn listened, not as a skeptic, but as a student. He did not question the visions. He questioned the limits of the Codex. Gilliman had written it as a weapon of order, a framework to prevent the excesses of ambition. But Derek Smarn argued that doctrine must adapt to threat, and if the visions were true, if the threat required evolution, then dogma was suicide. The first change was the rite of engagement. No longer would battle commence with standard codex formation. Every engagement would begin with ritual, single combat between champions, not to honor the enemy, but to draw first blood in the presence of whatever force watched from beyond the veil. To them, this was invocation, not arrogance, a way of stepping outside the flow of conventional war and into a space where victory was determined by merit, not mass. Their next change was crueler. The wounded protocol, a Marine who fell in battle, even if not fatally, was to be psychically cleansed, not healed, not recovered, cleansed. The librarians called it burning the shadow. They believed wounds carried fragments of the Fudiala, psychic, or worsened. To allow a Marine to recover without purification was to risk contamination of the entire chapter. Apothecaries were reassigned, their Medicae rites rewritten, flesh could be regrown, but faith had to be cleansed. When the Administratum noticed discrepancies in the 13th's after-action reports, they sent auditors. None returned. Officially, the chapter was marked as relocated to a classified theater and removed from the segmentum's rotation. A convenient omission. The Imperium, after all, has always preferred silence to contradiction. In time, the chapter ceased referring to itself by its old name. They became the Scaled Flame, a reference to one of the visions, a draconic entity of impossible scale. Not a demon, not a Xenos, but something in between. Something that burned without heat and judged without gaze. They began incorporating scaled motifs into their armor. Not ornamental, literal. Shed Xenos dermal plates, purified, sanctified, fused with ceramite, through an unknown bonding rite developed by their tech marines. No two warriors wore the same pattern. Each scale was earned in battle and bound through private ordeal. Then came the communion rites. At first, it was subtle. War trophies, stored in sealed vaults. Xenos artifacts categorized by function, not forbidden by provenance. The Scaled Flame believed that to destroy the tools of the enemy was to repeat the ignorance of pre-heresy, arrogance. Instead, they studied, slowly, reverently, with layers of psychic filtration, Eldar soulstones, Tyrannid, synapse nodes, even Necron, fragment Codal, exposed to controlled psychic scrutiny under watch of the Circle of Flame. What others would call heresy, they called reconnection, a reclaiming of the galaxy's larger truth. The Emperor, they whispered, had never ordered ignorance. Only fear had not all brothers agreed. Some resisted the new ways. Veterans who had bled under the Codex found themselves silenced in council, passed over for elevation, or gently reassigned to isolation duties on the outer moons. None were executed, none were punished, but none returned. Their names faded from ceremony, not scrubbed, simply ... unspoken ... Captain Elvin Thross. Once a stalwart of Marn's inner circle, was last seen entering the Vault of Whispers, carrying a cyclonic torpedo targeting core. The vault was sealed the next day. Official records cite structural instability. No detonation occurred, but the chapter ceased using that level of the monastery. Grass grew between the shattered flags of its entrance. The wind sings through its halls, and sometimes at the right hour echoes back a name. The scaled flame no longer deploys in standard formations. Their squads shift mid-battle, driven by psychic resonance. Their librarians direct tactical flow by aura sensing, not command tree. Their enemies falter, not because they are outnumbered, but because they are out. Doctrines break against them like tide on glass. They do not worship chaos. They do not reject the Emperor. They believe he too must evolve. That the Astronomicon is not a beacon, but a lens, and lenses can be turned. Their ships bear markings not found in Imperial records. Curved script, glyphs that predate Gothic, symbols drawn in blood and starlight. They still respond to distress calls, but only the ones no one else answers. They arrive when hope dies, not as saviors, as consequences. Rumors swirl that they commune with alien ghosts, that their chaplains speak in reversed tongues, that their gene seed glows under moonlight. Nothing confirmed, nothing denied. In the heart of their fortress lies the Pyrrhic halo, a relic none outside the circle of flame have seen. Said to burn without fire, said to whisper, futures not yet written, said to be alive. When asked on the rare chance a soul survives contact and dares ask what happened to the Codex Astartes, their answer is always the same. We did not break it. We turned the page. The Forge world once rang with the pulse of industry tentacles, of ignition echoing through cathedral-like manufactura. Every guard turned a hymn to the Omnissiah. Now, silence lingers like soot. The orbital elevators hang broken in the sky, like the ribs of a dying god, and the Mechanicus have long since withdrawn. Only the chapter remains. They were left behind not by betrayal, but by bandwidth. When the evacuation orders came, the data stream choked on priority cipher loads from Mars, and the final Voxcast never reached the outer defense bastions. Their name is now unknown. Their livery, dulled by ash and time, shows only the faintest outline of a one-sprout sigil gear split by a blade. Their heraldry is ritual now, not history. In the absence of enemy, they drill. Assault squads run breach exercises through collapsed Devastators fire into mock walls reconstructed nightly by servitor teams who can no longer speak. Each simulated battle is recorded, reviewed, annotated in scriptura, so dense it might as well be liturgical. Every day without contact is a test. Every test, a sacrament. The Tech Marines lead rites that have evolved past function. Lubrication is anointing. Calibration is absolution. When a bolter jams, it is not broken, it is penitent. Chanting fills the arming chambers before each drill, not with war cries, but with invocations to machine spirits, long silent. Some brothers claim to hear them answer, others nod in solemn envy. With time, the lines between combat and maintenance blur. A misfired loss round is examined not for fault, but for meaning. A crack in a greave becomes a warning. A cooling leak is reclassified as a prophecy. The Codex Astartes is still present, but its pages have been rearranged. Marginalia growing like mold in the margins. Footnotes becoming doctrine. Their chaplain is mute, not from wound or warp, but by oath. His face is a steel plate, etched with 1,000 prayers to both the Omnissiah and the Emperor, not as separate figures, but as facets of a unity no longer recognized by Mars. He speaks through gestures, through the rhythm of ritual strikes against the prayer gong, made from a reconditioned reactor bell. Every strike marks a phase of the day, every silence, a verdict. They do not speak of rescue, they speak of continuation. New initiates are not drawn from populist. The planet is dead. Instead, neophytes are fabricated, not servitors, but vat-grown stock sourced from archived gene template schematics. An ancient Magos biologist once warned of the psychological risks. That Magos is now part of the steel crypt beneath the central spire. His memory core repurposed to record sermons. The brothers no longer dream as men do. Their sleep is saturated with machine code liturgy in the echoes of battle that never occurred, simulated memory inserted via neurofiltration. They remember wars they never fought, and honor fallen comrades who never lived. Grief becomes a performance. Mourning is a duty. Funerary rites are held monthly for brothers lost to data friction or sequence failure, or other terms that hide the truth. Without war, the chapter had to invent death. One brother, Codicere Veriquence, tried to map the changes. He believed tracking the deviations from sanctioned ritual might preserve some trace of what they once were. He lasted 30 days before sealing himself inside a dormant night chassis and walking into the ash wastes. No one retrieved him. His name is now part of the launch cycle prayer for the training servitors. The chapter's librarians do not cast powers. The warp is too still here, or perhaps too afraid. Instead, they read. Every day, they inscribe revised histories into cogitators, carving narratives that redefine what it means to serve. They do not lie, but neither do they remember. They preserve purpose, and purpose, like steel, must be reforged. One day each cycle. The entire chapter assembles at the Ecoforge, a vast silent chamber once used to cast titanic armor plates. They gather not to build, but to listen. There, beneath the empty smelter towers, they chant in binary harmonia, resonance of voice and static, coded in machine hymn. It is called the Choir of Steel and Ash, and it is beautiful. Terrible, but beautiful. Some say it summons something, others say it keeps something away. They do not know what war is anymore, but they know its shape, its rhythm, its breath. They speak it like a language, even when the words have no target, because meaning must be maintained, and if no enemy comes to give it, then it must be made. No records exist of their request for extraction, because they never made one. The annals recorded the chapter's triumph with reverence, the cleansing of Telveron's gate, the breaking of the Ebon sigil, the 40-day siege against the Scourge, host of Hrax. Their banners hung in the halls of Terra for 1 full year, their names spoken in the same breath as heroes, long since entombed. And then came the reward, the honor few chapters ever receive. A custodian arrived, not with judgment, but with tribute. A golden reliquary, sealed and silent. No record details what lay within. The custodies offered no explanation, only a nod, only the gesture of elevation. That was where the hunger began. They were the Auric Scions then, bearers of lineage traceable to the Genesis chapter, who themselves came from the Ultramarines. Their oaths were pure, their record unblemished. But victory calcifies something in the soul when left too long unchallenged. The Scions began to see not just honor in their triumphs, but pattern, design, destiny. The relic, they believed, had not been given in thanks, but in preparation, a sign that they were chosen for more than war. Chosen to climb, the change began in the APO, the Carion. At first it was protocol. Every fallen battle brother's genocide must be reclaimed. But as the campaigns dragged on, Apothecary Vior of the Third Company began reporting anomalies, fragments of memory, sensory bleed-through, emotions not his own. It began when extracting genocide from Captain Malvek. Vior collapsed mid-procedure, eyes wide, whispering of golden staircases in orbit and voices that sang through his veins. He attributed it to fatigue, warp exposure. But the next extraction echoed the first, then the next. Not hallucinations. Visions. He began recording them. Short bursts, at first symbolic flashes, impossible languages, glimpses of wings made from radiant bone. He did not report them to the chaplains. He brought them to the Master of Sanctity only after he received confirmation. Multiple apothecaries, across multiple companies, all reporting similar bleed. It was not corruption. It was revelation. The Scions rewrote the rite of harvest. No longer was the genocide alone considered sacred. Now, the marrow, specifically the ossified spiral of the sternum, was preserved, purified, and anointed. They called it the sanguine spindle. Within its coils, they believed, was not just memory, but aspiration, not the past, but a stare to the future. Their librarians objected. Quietly, their warp readings had begun to spike. Dreams fractured, the veil thinned. A few spoke of tremors in the meditative chambers. One, librarian Ciros, suffered a full psychic hemorrhage during contemplation of a recovered sanguine spindle. Before he died, he screamed a single phrase: "The Emperor does not want you above him." They buried him in silence. His name erased from the librarius rolls. They called it death by impurity. But the apothecarian kept his spindle. The chapter's battle tactics changed. No longer focused on sustained engagements, they sought high casualty, high valor opportunities. They threw elite squads into doomed missions with only one instruction: make your death speak. They began choosing battlefields with high warp activity, as if proximity to the breach accelerated the vision bleed. Their chaplains rewrote funeral rites into elevation rites. The Reclusiarch declared death in battle, not as sacrifice, but currency for transference. During the purge of Varn's Hollow, a full company of scions deployed into the lower catacombs ahead of an exorcist's detachment. The scions never returned. The exorcists found only armor neatly arranged, gene seed missing, and the walls covered in intricate latticework drawn in dried marrow. No blood, no bodies, just the sound of whispering bone when the wind touched the ruins. The exorcists submitted a complaint to Segmentum Command. It was ignored. Within the Scion's fortress monastery, a tower rose, new not from imperial design. Curved, golden, seamless in architecture. Grown, not built. They named it the Spiral Reliquary. None without apothecarian clearance could enter. Above its apex hovered the Custodes, relic still unopened, untouched, its seal glowing faintly in warp light. The librarians petitioned for its destruction. They were denied by this time. The scions no longer referred to themselves in traditional terms. The word chapter vanished from liturgical texts. They called themselves the Choir Ascendant. Their commanders became custodians of Threshold. Their apothecaries, transmuters. The Codex Astartes was rewritten into harmonics, and their war canticles incorporated phrases untranslatable into Low Gothic. Their chaplains began speaking only in song. When the Inquisition arrived, it was not through the expected front. It came through silence. Records of the scions ceased updating, astropathic contacts failed, Mechanicus monitoring rites reported data corruption near their system. The Inquisition dispatched recon-killed cells to investigate. None returned, except one. Interrogator Luthien, months later, arrived at Watch Station Elixir, barefoot, eyes burned out, mouth full of gold dust. He carried no memory, only fragments. A phrase etched into the back of his skull by unknown means. We did not ascend. We were absorbed. The Choir Ascendant made no response to inquiries. Their system was marked restricted. Their name removed from the active chapter index. And yet, picked captures exist. From battlefields across the Segmentum, Marines in auric armor that hums with unseen vibration. No insignia, no heraldry, just the spiral glyph over their hearts. They do not speak. They do not coordinate with other Imperial forces. But they do not strike at the Imperium. They arrive only when death is certain, when defeat is guaranteed. They turn tides, and then vanish. Some believe they have become post-human in doctrine, that they no longer recognize the Emperor as sovereign, but as first among thresholds. Others believe they have crossed into a psychic resonance state, no longer requiring command, only proximity to death and faith to function. But there are darker whispers that the relic was not custodian at all, that it was planted, that the Custodes never gave anything, that the relic chose, and the chapter did not receive it. They were offered, and when they accepted, they did not ascend. They opened. It was once called Evalis Tertius, a shrine world devoted to the martyrs of Mortrax. Pilgrims walked its basalt roads barefoot for penance, tracing the long burn line of St. Agisol's final march with devotional blood and prayer. That was before the sky opened, before the wind turned red, before the ground swallowed cities whole without quake or sound. What followed was not invasion, it was removal, history, voice, identity, every vox record, every hololith, every liturgical fragment gone. Not erased, silenced. The Imperium declared the world lost, quarantined, marked for orbital cleansing. But when the bombardment ships arrived, they found resistance. Not seen, not heretics, marines, Astartes in scorched red armor. Their pauldrons unmarked, their helms expressionless save for long vertical scars etched where their chapter symbol should have been. They did not broadcast allegiance. They did not issue challenge. They simply stood atop the ruins and stared into orbit until the ships turned away. No shots fired, no threats made, just the kind of silence that makes admirals doubt their orders. They call them the Red Silence now, not for their color alone, but for the absence that clings to them. They have no known origin, no recorded founding, but their armor bears traces of forged Veridius craftsmanship, a pattern last used by the Blood Swords before their disappearance during the Fourth Black Crusade. Some have identified components matching the Black Consuls. Others suggest the Obsidian Ravens. None of it aligns. All of it conflicts. The librarians who accompany them do not speak, not to allies, not to each other. Their eyes are black, their lips sewn. Their hands tremble only when casting, and when they do, blood pours from their noses, their ears, sometimes their fingertips. But they continue, bound to their rights like condemned men marching to scaffold. One died mid-battle, clutching the skull of an enemy psyker whose last scream still echoed long after both corpses cooled. The chaplains wear shattered helmets, not cracked, deliberately broken. No two are alike. Some crushed inwards, some torn at the mouth. They give sermons in gesture slow, ritualistic movements that resemble combat, but never end in violence. They lead squads from the front, holding icons made of fused bone and melt glass, and when they halt, their brothers kneel as one, without cue, without hesitation, as if the ritual is embedded, not in memory, but in marrow. No orders, no recorded oaths. And yet, they fight with precision impossible without command structure. When they engage, it is sudden, not like an ambush, like a decision. Whole units blink into action simultaneously, moving like a blood flow surging to a wound. Their bolters are modified, no muzzle flare, no audible discharge, subsonic rounds engineered for atmosphere without echo. Enemies often die before they realize they've been seen. Survivors report a phenomenon. They cannot remember the moment of engagement, only that they were firing, then retreating, then bleeding. Memory gaps consistent with warp exposure, but with no demonic activity recorded. Inquisitorial agents attempted contact on 3 separate occasions. The first was met with stillness, the second with withdrawal, the third with something else. Not attack, not even acknowledgement. The agents found themselves unable to speak within 5 meters of the Red Silence formation. Vocal cords functioned, thoughts remained, but no sound emerged, not even breath. The effect ended only when distance was re-established. Autopsies on one agent, who collapsed during exposure, revealed no internal injury, just an empty space in the audio processing cortex of the brain, a psychic wound where sound used to live. And yet, they are not considered traitor, not officially. The Adeptus Terra maintains no verdict, because to issue one would require context, and the Red Silence offers none. They do not take territory, they do not preach. They arrive, they fight, they leave. Sometimes alongside Imperial Guard regiments, sometimes in systems declared under quarantine, sometimes in war zones long thought pacified. When they arrive, victory follows. But not triumph. Never celebration. Only aftermath. The Mechanicus attempted analysis during a joint campaign in the Arxian Verge. They recovered a fallen Red Silence Marine and began dissection. 3 tech priests were dead before the process finished. Not from violence, from cessation, neural arrest, machine thought disrupted. All systems failed. The servitors began humming, a melody matching no known frequency. The dissected Marine's corpse disintegrated into dust. The remaining tech priests began removing their own Vox implants without explanation. The warp recognizes them, not with hatred, with familiarity. During the siege of Raven's Fall, a daemon host locked in containment began laughing uncontrollably as soon as a Red Silence strike force entered the war zone. It spoke only one phrase, repeated until its flesh ruptured. The Silent Ones are listening again. Some among the Ordo, Melius, believe the Red Silence are the result of a ritual gone wrong, a chapter that attempted to purge the warp from their souls entirely, only to become echoes of what they cast out. Others believe they were formed deliberately, part of a secret custodian experiment in absolute obedience without command, a legion of instinct. But some whispered darker things, that the Emperor speaks not just through light, but through void, that the Astronomicon hums, not a song, but a silence so vast, only those who forget language can hear it, and that the Red Silence heard it first. Now, in the ruins of Avalus Tertius, they rebuild, not for war, for resonance. Their fortress monastery has no name. Its walls are not carved with honor rolls or glories, just sigils, repeated, geometric, unreadable by any machine. But when the wind passes through them, it creates tone, not music, just a single, unending note, low, empty, and full. They call the place Mornvale, though the stars around it are unmapped, their trajectories locked in decay spirals, no augur dares chart. The system is cursed, not by demon or warp storm, but by something quieter, something that makes even time stutter. No ships enter by choice. No signals leave. The chapter that once called this region a duty post, now calls it a tomb. They do not seek rescue. Rescue would mean acknowledgement. Acknowledgement would mean memory. And memory, in Mornvale, is dangerous. The chapter was once the Sons of Samaris, known for their precision strikes and relentless record-keeping. Now they are only referred to as the Remaining, not a name, a condition. Their fortress monastery drifts, half embedded in a planet's mantle. The rock warped by time compression and orbital trauma. Its towers lean at impossible angles, casting shadows in directions that contradict stellar light. The walls are covered not in iconography, but in scratches tallies without number. Hash marks worn into ceramite, like bone weathered by tide. They record nothing in script, only in subtraction. The ritual of remaining began as a morning practice. After the first silence, when half the chapter vanished overnight during a training rotation, those who stayed began a rite. Each confirmed kill earned a vow of silence. Each strategic failure demanded the erasure of one name from the company roster. What began as superstition calcified into structure. They began striking names, even when no one failed, even when no one spoke. They did it anyway, not to punish, but to preserve. To be remembered was to be noticed. To be noticed was to be taken. The chapter master, Kairos Malin, once a rhetorician of ultramarine descent, now speaks only in sleep. Servitors monitor his rest, transcribing his murmurs onto oxidized parchment. No one reads them aloud. The words are stored in a vault beneath the old Chapel of Origins, now repurposed into a sealed chamber where no light enters, only heat. The temperature is kept high, unbearably soritualistic punishment for a sin no one names. The librarius is extinct. The last librarian, Bran Volok, cast his final psychic beacon during the dimming the day, when every light on Mornvale blinked out for 11 seconds, then returned slightly dimmer. His body remained seated for 3 days afterward, untouched, eyes burned out, tongue bitten through. No successor was named. The role was folded into the collective right of the Fourth Company, whose battle canticles now substitute psychic command with synchronized breath. They inhaled before engagement, exhale only after the last enemy falls. The sound is a windstorm of release. No enemy has ever breached their inner sanctum, not because of strength, but because no enemies remain long enough to try. Raiders arrive, drawn by abandoned signal buoys, rogue Mechanicus teams, seeking derelict salvage. Nothing survives. Landing, the remaining leave, no wreckage, no body, just heat signatures where footprints once were, and Vox recordings corrupted by pulses of binary static that repeat one phrase. We are fewer. Each Marine paints his armor with bone dust collected from the honored dead. The exact composition is unknown, likely mixed with ash from the monastery's fuel. The result is a pale, almost translucent effect, giving the impression of skeletons moving beneath fractured plating. Their chapter insignia has been replaced with a blank square, no symbol, just absence. When asked, one of the remaining sergeants held up his palm and slowly wiped it across his chest plate, leaving behind a smear of silence. There is no promotion. Rank is a memory, and memories feed the hunger that waits in the walls. They fight in absolute coordination, using preset engagements called echo drills. These are mapped through the monasteries, labyrinthine halls, and memorized during silence meditations. Each movement corresponds to a loss already accounted for. Every kill is a moment already lived. They believe the past is a reservoir of motion and, by repeating it precisely, they avoid deviation. Deviation, to them, is death. The chapter master's voice last sounded during the 900th solstice of entrapment. He stood before the red courtyard named, not for blood, but for the mineral streaks left by subsurface tectonic heat, and whispered a word no servitor recorded. Those nearby dropped their weapons and wept blood. Since then, no one has stood in the courtyard, not even to clean the dust. It is now a place of pilgrimage for those who have lost their names. When a Marine fails a mission or worse, survives when others did not, he walks the red courtyard alone. If he makes it across, he is permitted to forget. His name is struck, his armor repainted. He is issued a new designation, Remnant. There are many remnants now, more than half the chapter, and the last recorded encounter with the Inquisition. Ordo Obsoletus dispatched a Voxcryer drone to survey Mornvale's orbit. The drone lasted 13 minutes before its memory core was overwritten with images of empty corridors. No movement, just a slow, repeating loop of candles burning backwards into wax. The final image before full corruption was a wall filled with names that faded as they were viewed. The datalog concluded with a single entry. They remain, and only because they forget. It is believed that the warp does not hunt them as it hunts others, because there is nothing left to claim. No ambition, no pride, no name. The remaining walk the line between existence and absence, like penitent wraiths wrapped in armor that no longer carries heraldry. They are not loyal. They are not traitors. They are residue. And in their hearts, beneath layers of silence and erasure, a question remains not spoken, not written, not asked aloud, but lived. How much of yourself can you remove before what's left still counts as you? They do not answer. They continue. The planet below was never named in their records, only marked by its last known designation. Designate, ninth. It burned slowly, not in fire, but in collapse. Its atmosphere had fractured along lines unseen, pockets of gravity folding inward, like skin bruised from the inside. Oceans evaporated without heat. Cities inverted into sinkholes without quake. But the chapter in orbit remained. They did not descend, not again. Once they had tried. In the earliest days of the planetary decay, The full strength of the 8th chapter deployed to reinforce an Astra Militarum evacuation effort. The Marines dropped in formation, weapons primed, confidence absolute. None returned. The world swallowed them without conflict. Vox contact, Cutmit, no signs of violence. Just a hole in the ledger, where once there had been names. The remaining Marines retreated to their orbital bastion, Sanctorum Resolus, a battered strike cruiser turned tomb ship. Its engines failed during planetary escape. No warp jump possible. No communications outbound. It was not a prison, but a pendulum, eternally circling the world that had taken a third of them. From that moment forward, the chapter no longer marked time by Terran standard. They measured it in death. Each fallen brother became a their names carved into armor, not as honor, but as arithmetic. When Sergeant Yurick fell to entropic breach in the outer hull, his death was marked on the pauldron of every surviving member. Jarek did. The number signifying he was the 17th death since the descent. No eulogies, no burial, just inscription. The counting became doctrine. Librarians ceased forecasting, turning instead to chronomantic calculation attempts to trace causal threads between each death and planetary shift. They believed the planet below responded not to nature, not to warp, but to pattern. A ritual of entropy that could be broken only by closure, completion. They called it the final cycle. In private, they referred to their own deaths as ticks. The chaplains adapted sermons to this rhythm. Litanies became countdowns. Oaths were recited in reverse. From dust to oath, from silence to storm, I fall forward. Their helmets bore no heraldry, only slashes, one per fallen brother. Some warriors were covered in them, others had none, their armor polished and still, marked only by the hunger to inherit more. When one died, his slot was assumed by the next in silence. Ranks did not shift, roles did not reassign. The structure remained frozen, ossified around the empty seats of fallen leaders. A commander who died in orbit was still considered in charge. Orders were interpreted as echoes, projected through those who once served beneath him. In this way, the Dead Watch functioned as a shattered clockage hand, moving independently. Yet tethered to a center long since stopped, they fought rarely, but with terrible intent. Whenever a distress signal pierced the Mandeville envelope, the Dead Watch mobilized not to rescue, not to ally, but to study. They would land only long enough to determine whether the conflict could align with the cycle. If the opposition was deemed relevant, sufficiently symbolic, sufficiently terminal, they would engage, and then vanish. Survivors from these engagements reported strange behaviors. Marines who fought in complete silence, who moved like memory, who bled black smoke when struck. One trooper claimed he saw a Marine with a clockwork dial embedded in his chest plate, each tick accompanied by a whispered name. Another described an Astartes who carried no weapon, only a scroll of names reading them aloud, even as enemy fire tore through his limbs. None could verify, but all accounts ended the same way. They did not come to win. They came to mark. Apothecaries became archivists, sealing bone fragments from the fallen into transparent time-lock vaults. These capsules were stored in the central nave of the cruiser, now renamed the Chronoseric. The vault's core pulsed once every 13 hours, aligned with the planet's erratic tidal pulse. No one knew why, but they waited for it. The few remaining tech marines began modifying their brothers' armor with inbuilt chronometers, some etched with spinning dials, others with fluidic time markers suspended in plasteel veins. The modifications were not standardized. They were individualized, personalized. No two warriors wore the same time. The contradiction was intentional. They believed that by fracturing time, they were resisting its flow. Inquisitorial efforts to contact the chapter failed. A single transmission was received in response to a high-authority broadcast from Segmentum Command. "We will speak again when the last name is marked." The message bore no encryption. It was delivered as raw Vox code, encoded in Martian clock runes predating M1. The warp does not touch them, not overtly. No demons manifest within the cruiser's walls. No whispers taint their sleep. But psychers report interference, a sensation of delayed thought, of answers arriving before questions, of being watched by something that ticks. Some believe the chapter no longer sees the warp as threat or tool, but as context, as the second hand on a clock that spans stars. Others suggest they have glimpsed some deeper pattern in the entropy of war, that each death is not loss, but punctuation in a sentence the galaxy is still writing. Their chapter master, Quadrant Holix, has not spoken in over a decade. He sits in a throne welded to the bridge viewport, staring down at the world that stole his future. His armor has not been cleaned. His hands remain clasped over the hilt of a blade never drawn. Around him, the command dais continues to operate, manned by sub-commanders who treat his silence not as absence, but as instruction. He is not comatose. His eyes move, slowly, deliberately, as if reading something written across the void. When asked by a visiting Mechanicus envoy what their chapter's ultimate goal was, the acting Reclusiarch responded not with explanation, but with a single final phrase: "When the last of us falls, the clock will break, and if it doesn't, then we were the gears. They still orbit, they still count, and somewhere below, the planet pulses like a slow, dying heart waiting for the chime." The engagement was never logged in the Hall of Records. No formal dispatch, no commemorative edict. Only a single line in an internal Custodes communique, obscured beneath security sigils. Operation Veil Cincture, Halo Expanse, anomaly contained, casualty level acceptable. What anomaly? What casualties? No detail followed. No follow-up ever approved. But beneath the cold silence of official records, memory clings to fractured data-scorched pict captures, corrupted helmet vids, fragments of armor recovered by salvage crews too terrified to speak. The Custodes never speak of the chapter they fought beside, but they remember them. The armor was gold at first, not auric like the Emperor's Guard, but a pale matte hue that seemed to repel light rather than reflect it. No laurels, no Imperium Aquila, just a broken circle painted where the chest eagle would have rested. Their name was not recorded, only an emblem found on a single recovered purity seal. A spiral uncoiling into teeth. Some called them the Spiral Sanctum. They did not arrive by conventional means. They emerged from a subspace rent along the edge of the halo stars, near a region known only as the bleeding vector, an expanse of gravitational turbulence, where warp and real space not like tendon. Custodian Strategos had reported an unknown signal pulsing from within the region, not warp-sourced, not something else. The kind of frequency that registers as silence until you listen long enough. 3. Custodes shield companies deployed. They found the Spiral Sanctum already fighting. Not enemies. Themselves. Half the chapter was arranged in concentric circles, standing motionless, armor covered in carved text that moved even when still. The other half engaged, them silent, efficient, without rage. It was not a battle. It was ritual. The Custodes intervened. No orders were exchanged, no allegiance declared, but when the Spiral Sanctum turned upon the greater threat, the unnameable mass coalescing from the center of the conflict zone, the Custodes did not question. They fought alongside the chapter for 3 days, side by side, gold and gold. Whatever they faced was never defined. Not Xenos, not demon. It had no form consistent across pict, no fixed location. One custodian described it as a thought that fought back. Another called it the consequence of being seen. The Spiral Sanctum did not attempt to explain. They spoke only once, and only to the Custodes. Their commander, name unknown, voice like wind across teeth, said, "We are the breath between oaths. The promise before it is named, you are the Emperor's flesh." We are his echo. The Custodes did not respond. When the anomaly broke, if it ever truly did, the spiral sanctum vanished. Not in warp flash, not in withdrawal. They simply ceased. The last image from that battlefield was of one Marine kneeling in a ring of blood that was not his, tracing glyphs into the mud that shimmered even in monochrome. His armor had cracked down the middle, revealing a second skin beneath. Not flesh, not machine, something written. Years later, salvage crews operating near the bleeding vector found debris armor fragments, bolter coils, pieces of ceramite engraved with non-Gothic script. The language was alien in shape, but not in tone. Linguists reported that the glyphs made sense emotionally before they made sense. You understood them with the part of the mind that dreams in symbols. A language older than Gothic, older than High Terra. The kind of language one carves, not writes. The sigils were translated roughly. I bind myself to the shape beneath, not chaos, not faith. Pact. What frightened the Inquisition was not the potential heresy. It was that the Custodes said nothing. They did not issue denunciation. They did not clarify. They sealed the records and moved on. Some believe the Spiral Sanctum were a lost founding, one of the so-called dark foundings initiated during a crisis of galactic proportion. Their origins too uncertain for the Adeptus Terra to accept. Others suggest they were not founded at all, but assembled Marines drawn from broken chapters, called by vision, reformed around a singular purpose. Purpose, not loyalty. There are theories, darker still, that the Spiral Sanctum were created not by the High Lords, but by something older. That their purpose was not to serve the Imperium, but to interface with it, like a ritual object introduced into a machine. Not to change its function, but to prevent it from becoming something else. A failsafe, not against enemies, but against metamorphosis. That the Custodes did not fight beside them out of command, but recognition. Somewhere in the vaults beneath Luna, it said there exists a vault with armor that predates the heresy. Armor inscribed with spiroglyphs. Armor shaped not by smiths, but by repetition. Each mark carved by one hand, slowly, over centuries. That vault, they say, now hums. Recently, on war-torn worlds where anomalies, bloom zones, where Vox traffic reverses, and blood runs cold before spilling, reports have surfaced of Marines in old gold, faces masked by curved helms without visors. They do not announce themselves. They do not aid. They simply walk into battlefields and trace circles into the ash. Some think they are survivors of the Spiral Sanctum. Others believe they were never gone, that they were sealed, and now, whatever pact they held is close to completion. Because some things don't end, they recur. It was declared in the voice of triumph. Carried across Vox circuits, an astropathic relay. Tomb Complex 9-1 be neutralized. Sector secure. Glory to the Emperor. The chapter responsible, the Iron Revenants, had spent 6 years beneath the soil of Zoptos 3, carving their way through obsidian corridors, enduring trap-layered labyrinths, and Gauss-fielded dead ends. Their victory was absolute. The tomb was collapsed. The Necron Overlord shattered. The Cryptek wards disabled. They lit the victory pyres and planted the banner. It was the last signal ever received from the surface. Months passed. Reinforcement craft arrived at orbit to extract the revenants and begin reclamation protocols. But the planet beneath had changed. Not visibly. Its mass, terrain, and atmospheric data aligned with expectation. But star mapping failed. Celestial constellations used for orientation across segmentum obscurus were wrong, tilted, reversed, some missing altogether. Warp translation into the system became erratic. The navigator aboard the Ardent Pilgrim described the route as a river that loops on itself mid-flow. A second attempt by the fury of man resulted in a permanent temporal loop. Its bridge crew stuck, repeating their first hour aboard until the ship self-scuttled. No contact with the Iron Revenants was re-established, but signals continued. Low-frequency pulses, looped voice logs, Vox reports of engagements long past. Repetition, not decay, as if the chapter was still transmitting but had nothing new to say. Then came the first anomaly. A picked feed from one of the early extraction augers captured what appeared to be a Revenant patrol moving through the ruins of the upper tomb structure. Standard pattern, combat spacing correct, but the timestamp buried deep in feed metadata was dated 4 years before the tomb had been declared cleared. Another auger sweep showed the same patrol, same route, same gate, a perfect loop. The details so precise, it became indistinguishable from recording, only it wasn't. Orbital auspex detected movement at consistent intervals. Power fluctuations, heat signatures, each instance identically spaced, identically timed, as though the planet's surface had become a reenactment, not of history, of memory. The Mechanicus dispatched a Scriptorium Fractalis team to investigate. They landed, began excavation. Within 40 hours, their internal chronometers began to desynchronize. Vox records showed Tech Priest Anaxos stating, "This place is not resisting time, it is editing it." All contact ceased within the hour. Their lander remained on the surface, engines primed, untouched. The team was gone, but not removed. Their footprints remained in the dust, circling the craft. One full orbit, then a second layer of prints, going the opposite direction. No deviation, no scatter, just loops. The Iron Revenant's chapter barge remained in orbit, manned by a skeleton crew. The master of the forge, Dreller Fan, remained aboard. He began receiving data scratches in the ship's cogitators, not authorized, feedback spikes carrying fragments of familiar phrases. Victory attained. Tomb collapse confirmed. Victory attained. Each phrase ending with a different voice modulation, as if the words were being spoken anew each time by different members of the same squad. Fan isolated the audio strands and compiled them. 17 voices. All belonging to Revenants, confirmed dead, he ordered. The ship sealed and initiated full quarantine protocol, but the transmissions persisted, not from the planet, from inside the ship's data stacks. He began erasing them. They returned. Then they began predicting his orders, a full week before his death. The following line appeared in the ship's command log, time-stamped and authenticated. Master Fant will incinerate himself in the reactor core to escape the Echo. He did, with no leadership and no clear cause for escalation. Ospentum Command issued an orbital denial order sterilization of the planetary surface by cyclonic warhead. No impact. Footage from the strike. Confirmed weapon deployment, but the fireball never formed. The warhead vanished the moment it entered the upper stratosphere. Its telemetry stuttered, then replayed backward. From that point forward, Zertos 3 was declared a sealed system. No further attempts made, but the Iron Revenants are still visible, or rather, versions of them. PICT-logs from long-range observatories catch moments shadowed forms moving in perfect symmetry, sometimes even overlapping, the same squad appearing twice within the same frame, same posture, same breath plume. Some frames show dozens of repetitions, like echoes caught in layered glass. Marines, with no visible damage. Others frozen mid-motion, as if caught between frames of reality. But they still operate. Scout drones sent to observe were ignored. Some even escorted through the tomb outskirts by what appeared to be Revenant sergeants. The drones returned with footage of the complex rebuilt, then destroyed, then rebuilt again. A loop that tightens every time. One log entry showed a Revenant captain kneeling before the tomb gate, driving his chainsword into the ground over and over, not with anger, with rhythm. Behind him, a company of brothers stood unmoving. As the drone hovered closer, the captain's voice broke Vox's silence. We won. That was the price. In a secured Mechanicus databank, there exists a hypothesis that the tomb the Revenants collapsed was not a structure, but a temporal Gata-layered event space where Necron logic operated not in cause and effect, but in finality and condition, that by destroying the Overlord and collapsing the tomb, the Revenants triggered the gate's final clause. Victory equals stasis. Completion equals repetition. The logic of a machine that views time not as a river, but as a spool designed to wind only when necessary. The Revenants, by winning, became its proof. Now, they relive their conquest in infinite permutations, victory not as glory, but as trap. Their chapter banner, once marked with the broken skull of a Xenos foe, now displays only a ring. Perfect, unbroken, the loop. Perhaps they know. Perhaps they know. Perhaps they don't. Perhaps knowing is part of it. Perhaps all that's left is the repetition of a war already won, because some tombs are not meant to be breached, and some victories are the lock. There is no record of their founding, no gene line traceable, no Primarch claimed, no decree of formation preserved in the vaults of the Adeptus Terra. Even the chapter designation has been lost, stripped from the roll calls of the forgotten in the vast churn of imperial bureaucracy and war. Their fortress monastery no longer exists, if it ever did. Their ships have no names. Their armor carries no sigils, no color, no trim, just matte, scorched ceramite that bears the same hue as dust. They operate in silence, not as ritual, not as penitence, but as default. There are no Vox transmissions, no encoded orders, no ident tags, no beacon pulses, but they move in formation, in unison, entire squads sweeping across dead cities with rifles raised, clearing rooms, executing combat drills, securing supply chains for regiments that never arrive. They are not ghosts. They are real. They bleed. They kill. They maintain their armor, reload their bolters, strip down engines. They never speak. The first confirmed sighting came from the ruins of Barist Hive, where survivors of an orc incursion were discovered by Medicaid teams, days after a relief force failed to arrive. The survivors spoke of warriors, massive armored, voiceless, who descended from ash-choked skies and cleared the hive block by block. No markings, no banner, no demands, just coordinated extermination. Then they vanished. The survivors remembered one thing. Every time they passed a mirror or reflective surface, their rescuers looked wrong, off by half a gesture, out of sync with themselves, like they were remembering a movement while doing it. The Inquisition dispatched auditors. The auditors found nothing. No trail, no heat signature, only one autogun casing embedded with a prayer written backward. That was the beginning. Since then, they've appeared in other war zones, never in the same segmentum twice, always arriving without signal, never landing by known means, sometimes in the middle of battle, sometimes after, picking through wreckage with the efficiency of a logistics corps that still thinks a war is ongoing. Once they arrived at an administratum node overrun by a chaos splinter cult. The cult was prepared for Astra-Milit. They encountered silence instead. Footage recovered from the shattered remains of the node's pit loggers showed the chapter moving through fire and loss fire without breaking formation. Bolters fired without flash. Movement coordinated without command. Cultists ran, broke, screamed. Not because they were outnumbered, but because their prayers stopped working. The warp, for a moment, felt far away. When the last cultist died, the chapter remained for exactly 13 hours. Not to cleanse, not to burn, just to watch. Then they walked into the snow and did not return. Efforts to trace them by pattern have failed. They leave no warp signature. Their armor is not standard issue. Some pieces date back to the Great Crusade. Others appear custom-forged from battlefield scrap. Their loadouts vary. Some carry bolters long since phased out of circulation. Others wield weapons not catalogued by the Mechanicus. The Adeptus Est does not acknowledge them. The Inquisition has no file that isn't redacted into uselessness, but they are real, and they still serve. One theory claims they are the remnants of a chapter declared excommunicate traitorous but never received the censure order. Perhaps the astropath died before transmission. Perhaps the signal never reached their ship. Perhaps they were too deep in the warp, or worst, too far from time. Others believe they were created for a singular mission, a campaign so secret, so blackened in record, that even the conclusion was erased. But the Astartes deployed to it never received debrief, never returned, just continued. A lost war with no terminal command. Now, they drift from front to front, locked in a cadence, broken only by proximity to battle. There are reports of them fighting alongside Astra Militarum regiments, matching fire patterns in trench rotations perfectly, despite no communication. One guardsman claimed they even dragged wounded into cover, and marked medical crates with sigils made of binding. Taped out another swore. One of them used an Auspex to reactivate a defunct turret and then saluted it before moving on. A battlefield. Vid capture from Nedrath 9 shows a Marine with no insignia walking through the smoke, carrying a fallen PDF officer's corpse like a relic. No words, no prayers. Just placement, arms crossed, helmet adjusted, a gloved hand tapped once against the man's dog tags. Then the Marine turned and rejoined the firefight. They are precise, but not cruel, brutal, but not sadistic, efficient, but not alive in the way others are. If you watch closely, there's always a pause between their movements, a fraction of a second, like the moment before memory becomes action, like they are checking a list not stored in their minds, but embedded into their bodies. Chaplains have seen them. None have approached. One tried. He was a reclusiarch of the Obsidian Claws, tasked with tracing fallen relics. He found them in a burned-out manufactorum, assembling crates for an unknown deployment. He stepped forward, raised his crosier, spoke the litany of recognition. They looked at him, all of them, and then moved aside, created a path, but did not speak, did not acknowledge, just partied, then resumed their work. The reclusiarch wept, not from fear, but from what he saw in their eyes. Nothing, no hate, no pain, no loyalty, no defiance, just function. A chapter built to obey, now divorced from command. They still fight because that is what they were made to do. They still march because no one told them to stop. And in the silence of war zones, long since abandoned, their boots still echo. They do not ask who they fight for. They do not care what banners fly. They see violence. They end it, then they vanish. No victory cries, no spoils, just the whir of powered servos, the hiss of rebuilt respirators, the shadow of something once called noble. Now just motion. In the deepest vaults of Terra, there's a protocol buried under layers of administrative decay. Contingency LOOO, Nola Astartes, autonomous combat remnants. No explanation, no signatures, just a closing line. Do not awaken, do not order, let them end in motion. And yet, they haven't. They still walk, still fight, still serve, and no one remembers who told them to. Begin. The Carpathian Drift is a graveyard of forgotten system-stead stars. Fractured moons, orbital debris frozen in slow collapse. It was once a thriving trade corridor between Segmentum Tempestus and the Ultima Fringes, until warp instability forced its abandonment. Now it drifts beyond Imperial mapping, a scar of black gravity and unaligned time. Navigators avoid it. Astropaths flinch when it is mentioned. No orders are given to investigate. No campaigns are planned within its void. And yet, Whispers leak from the silence, not screams, not threats, just scripture, whispered backward, slow, reverent, distorted by radiation storms and dust-cracked vox rings. The phrases repeat endlessly, layered atop each other like a hymn unraveled. Linguists hear them and report nausea, disorientation, faint bleeding from the ears. But when decoded, the words always lead back to one pattern: the Emperor's name, inverted, reversed, not mocked, not twisted, but reflected. It was a black ship that made first contact, or rather, strayed too close. The astropath aboard began to convulse before any visual confirmation was made. She did not scream, she chanted. Fragments of known ecclesiarchal verses, but each one flipped. Not the words alone, the meaning. The light burns away shadow, she spoke, before correcting herself with bleeding gums. The shadow outlines the light. Then came the silhouette, a strike cruiser, unmarked, emerged from the drift's edge. Its engines cold, drifting on gravity currents alone. No vox call, no shields raised, just motion, at first mistaken for derelict. Until the librarian on board the black ship felt the weight of psychic presence moving like oil across his wards. He described it not as an attack but an unveiling, as if something inside me was being shown to me for the first time, and it was praying. The cruiser passed without engagement. Later, analysis of black ship logs showed it was transmitting something, a signal buried in carrier noise, scripture, but not any known text. The syllables were archaic, the cadence identical to High Gothic, but each word reversed phonetically, played forward. They sounded like the litanies of the ecclesiarchy, played backward. They became something else, a form of worship not aimed at the Emperor's deeds, but at his absence, his refusal to speak, a reverence not for light, but for what the light casts in outline. They are called many things in sealed whispers, the echoed, the nocturnals of his name, the inverted host, but among those who've seen them and returned, a single title persists. The Mirror Saints. They operate only at night, not in fear of the sun, but in devotion to the inverse of its cycle. They deploy to war zones hours after engagement ends. They do not seek enemies. They seek aftermaths, bodies, craters, ruins, evidence. Each battlefield is treated as scripture in need of annotation. They inscribe glyphs onto shell casings, dip purity seals in the blood of the dead, reassemble broken weapons into altars without prayer. Where chaplains offer clarity, they offer contradiction. Where the Codex gives order, they seek symmetry. They avoid imperial forces, never attacking, never interfering. When encountered, they do not raise bolt, they raise scrolls. Each marine carries one, not a war manual, a mirrored liturgy, scrolls written from end to beginning. They unroll them downward, speak them upward, and close them with a seal of silence. Those who hear the full recitation forget it instantly but retain the sensation of having remembered something important, something already buried. Veterans have reported seeing their mothers. Chaplains speak of the Emperor standing back to back with a shadow too large to name. None are harmed, but none remain unchanged. Librarians of the Mirror Saints bleed when they cast, not from strain but from internal contradiction. Their powers manifest as reflection, not offense. Enemy psychers, who attempt to assault them, report immediate inversion of intent, their powers rebounding not as attack, but as confessional. During the Aldhaven skirmish, a Tientian sorcerer lashed a mere librarian with warped tongues only for his own secrets to spill from his mouth in uncontrollable screams. He died, confessing the names of the children he'd once had as a mortal, tears turning to glass. The Mirror Saints do not record victories, they collect corrections. Each engagement ends with a marking, a sigil burned into the earth, or a structure carved to resemble its own inverse. One battlefield featured a single phrase etched into scorched concrete, repeated dozens of times in descending sighs: "I see you," because he does not. Their armor is a contradiction of patterns white and black interlaced in impossible symmetry, not painted, woven into the material. Their helms bear no lenses, just mirrored surfaces that reflect the world distorted, as though every angle had been reversed. Those who see their faces report not horror, but the sensation of being recognized, deeply, regretfully, intimately, then forgotten again. The Mechanicus has attempted data recovery from their transmissions. Every attempt has ended in paradox loop collapse. Logic cores begin to recite rather than compute. One servitor began chiseling phrases into its own cranial plate. When disconnected, it wept black coolant from its eyes. The ecclesiarchy has issued no formal heresy charge, because they cannot identify a heresy that has been committed. The Mira saints pray. They do not blaspheme. They venerate the emperor. They merely speak his name in reverse, and when asked once by a particularly bold canonist why, they replied in unison, because the reflection is the only part that looks back. The Carpathian drift remains silent, but in the void between systems, pilgrims have begun to dream of mirrored thrones, of litanies sung in inversion, of chapels built upside down and walked through on the ceiling. They wake weeping, not from fear, but from awe, because in some dreams they see the emperor, and in those dreams, he is not a light. He is the outline of everything the light could not reach. They were recorded as lost in M33, an exploratory chapter sent into the Gularan expanse to chart potential staging worlds. No final contact, no distress signal, no trace. Their designation Oblivion Scourge was quietly scrubbed from the annals after a century of silence. No bells tolled, no monuments raised, only a line in faded ink, presumed consumed by warp entanglement, no return. And for millennia, that was true, until the comets began to fall. At first, they were dismissed minor celestial bodies, irradiated but inert, burning up on contact with outer atmospheres. But the readings told another story. Warp trace elements clung to the impact zones. Not taint, not demonic, but residue, like psychic rot. The soil did not blacken, it shimmered. Local fauna either died instantly, or grew teeth in places that never evolved to house them. Astropaths within proximity dreamed of eyes opening inside their own skulls, looking back toward systems long extinguished. Then the Marines arrived, not from orbit, not from any known trajectory. They emerged from the impact zones themselves, crawling from smoking craters as if birthed by the comets. Their armor bore the insignia of the long-lost Oblivion Scourge, but twisted, etched in bone, shaped like jaws turned inside out. Their helms were scarred open, some missing entirely, revealing pale, smooth faces stretched into expressions that hovered just outside the realm of joy. They laughed, not in mockery, in hunger. Their vox grills, when they functioned, emitted broken fragments of old imperial hymnals looped, corrupted, stitched together with static and the occasional wet gasp. These were not Astartes in the modern sense. Their gait was too fluid, their posture too crooked, their weapons altered beyond standard issue. Bolters were fused with crystalline growths. Melee implements hummed with residual kinetic pull, dragging nearby ferrous material with every swing. The Inquisition dispatched a rapid response team to one of the earliest confirmed impact sites on Viasta Prime. The team made landfall. Contact was established, then broken. Not violently, not explosively, just undone. The last transmission was a voice not from the team, but from something wearing Astartes plate. We brought it back with us. Now we burn to remember how it tasted. The data stream ended. Analysis of the crater revealed warpstone veins woven through the comet's husk, threads of concentrated psychic matter, usually only found in zones of ancient demon impact. But these stones were stable, contained, refined, harvested. The conclusion: these comets weren't natural. They were delivered, and the Oblivion Scourge followed. They do not build fortresses. They do not claim systems. They trace the path of the falling stones like bloodhounds chasing the scent of their first kill. They arrive as the ash cools and begin to feed. Not with mouths, with presence. Witnesses report squads kneeling in unison, pressing their palms to the impacted stone, and vibrating like strings tuned to frequencies only the warp understands. Their librarians do not chant. They do not cast. They absorb. One was recorded inhaling warp residue from the air itself, eyes rolled back, mouth split too wide. The pressure of his consumption caused auger lenses to rupture. The recording ended when the lens began whispering its own name over and over. There are no apothecaries among them. No tech marine. No chaplains? If such roles exist, they are concealed behind a function now alien to the Imperium's structure. Leadership appears rotational. Command passed not by rank, but by volatility. The one who shakes the most, the one whose flesh distorts fast asleep. But they are not uncontrolled. Their deployments show pattern, precision, coordinated timings with impact trajectories tracked across light years. They know where the stones will fall, or perhaps they call them. During the siege of Karan Hive, the Scourge arrived mid-battle. Imperial Guard regiments had been fighting orcs for 3 days, holding the line by attrition and faith alone. The sky cracked. A meteor struck just outside the eastern sprawl. The Scourge emerged in full force, daring through the orcs in silence. Not a word spoken, just laughter. And when the orcs broke, when victory could have been claimed, the Scourge turned, not on the humans, but on the comet. They formed a perimeter around the impact, began dismantling the structure piece by piece, fingertips glowing with warp saturation, armor plates splitting at the seams to accommodate pulsing nodules of crystalline growth. One guardsman recorded this. They fed on it like it was memory, like they were starving for something they forgot they were. The comets, when fully consumed, leave nothing, not rubble, not ash, just a scorched ring, faintly humming with low-grade psychic distortion. The soil remembers what was taken, even if nothing else does. The Scourge, once they finish, vanish, not via ship, not teleportation. They walk into the stone as it dissolves, swallowed piece by piece by the thing they brought back with them. The cycle continues. Some say they are no longer loyal. Others insist they never fell. That whatever found them in the Gularan expanse was not chaos, but something older, a hunger not malevolent, but natural. That the warp is not simply malevolence and madness but a nutritional field. A garden for those who remember how to chew. And the Oblivion Scourge remembers. They are evolving. Their bodies are changing. Bone grows over ceramite. Veins of warpstone trace under. Their skin like circuitry lit from within. Librarians with mouths sealed shut still scream during feeding. Rites. Marines leave behind fragments of themselves, bone shards, etched with names they've long outgrown. Some Imperials have mistaken them for salvation, for angels come to cleanse. But those who survive know better. They're not here to save anyone. They're here because something fell from the sky, and inside it was the taste of before. They were first mistaken for the Black Legion, a patrol of Astra Militarum from the 83rd K. Detachment encountered them near the ruins of Bastion Q, where a word-bearer's warband had fled after torching an ecclesiarchy shrine. The guardsmen expected a last stand. They found only wreckage. Power armor split open like eggshells, bolter fire scarred across marble, and a smell not of smoke but perfume, something floral and chemical. The only figures in sight were Astartes in black, trimmed in gold, marked with the eye of Horus. They did not fire. They nodded once, then walked into the FOG. But they weren't the Black Legion, not by gait, not by silence, and certainly not by grace. In the weeks that followed, similar reports echoed across Segmentum obscure. Chaos warbands torn to pieces, sometimes shot, sometimes shredded, always thorough, never looting, always vanishing before contact could be established. Each site bore the same signature, scorched gold paint over matte black armor. The sigil of the enemy worn plainly. Proudly, the Inquisition took notice. They dispatched Ordo Hereticus observers. Some returned shaken, others didn't return at all. Those who did described the Astartes not as heretics, but as Echo's warriors that fought chaos with chaos's mask, that wore the symbols not in reverence, but reversal. They are known by no formal title, but among inquisitors and renegade, they bear a whispered designation, the Penumbral Blade, a chapter that once bore a name, a banner, a creed, but now wears only contradiction. Their doctrine is unwritten, their heraldry erased. The only language they seem to follow is mimicry. Wherever traitor legions strike, the Penumbral Blade appears days or weeks later bearing the same colors, same sigils, same posture, but different purpose. They don't announce themselves. They don't broadcast, but the enemy recognizes them. During the siege of Vexhall, the Iron Warriors laid siege to an orbital dock. 3 days in, a second warband arrived, matching colors, matching armor. The Iron Warriors welcomed them in, assuming reinforcement. 30 minutes later, the airlocks ruptured and the docks burned from within. When Imperial pickets finally arrived, they found Iron Warrior corpses nailed to walls, and among them, others identical, but every corpse bore a single wound to the heart, executed, deliberate, almost as if by request. Everywhere they go, they leave confusion. Some Chaos warbands believe them to be exiles, others see them as redeemers, and in some rare cases, traitor Marines surrender to them. There is verified by multiple Mechanicus cogitators of a word-bearer dropping his bolter, kneeling before a penumbral warrior, and whispering, "Finally, someone who sees me." He was executed, but not with cruelty. His body was anointed, his armor stripped of all symbols, his corpse burned, and the smoke funneled through a golden censer mounted to the Penumbral Blade's back. A ritual, a repurposing the theory. They do not kill the corrupted, they contain them. Each Penumbral warrior wears modified armor sarcophagus-like chestplate enclosures, vented vambraces, helm filters adapted not for atmosphere, but spiritual debris. Their librarians are not combat casters, they are vessels. One was observed walking barefoot through the aftermath of a demon incursion, collecting shattered sigils, pressing them to his bare skin. His body smoked, but he never cried out. Later, the runes vanished, not removed, absorbed. Imperial scholars theorize the Penumbral Blade believes that corruption, once committed, cannot be undone, but it can be mirrored, transferred, transformed by donning the sin of another. They believe they rob it of power, that to fight chaos, one must become its echonaut, its disciple. Their enemies don't understand, their allies fear them, and yet, they win. Every battlefield they claim becomes a site of ritual purgation, not by flame, by reflection. Cracked helms arranged in mirrored spirals, demon corpses pierced with swords in identical poses, walls lined with pick slates showing enemy atrocities played backward, then looped until the recording burns into silence. When asked why they wear the sigils of traitors, one warrior captured for a brief time by a death watch, Kilton replied simply, "So they have nowhere left to hide." Then he bit out his own tongue, and died before psychic interrogation could begin. The Death Watch now observes penumbral operations from a distance. There is no formal decree against them, nor one in favor. The Ordo Malleus has marked them as conditional assets. The Ecclesiarchy has marked them as blasphemous miracles. The Warp does not mark them at all. Demons hesitate in their presence, not in fear, but in recognition, like seeing a version of themselves that chose differently. There are stories of demon princes halting mid-charge, of cultists dropping to their knees in sobbing awe, of warp storms pausing for breath as mirrored gold strides through fire. Because the blade does not banish the darkness. They wear it, they own it, and then they light it from within. Their last known deployment was on Margan Secundus, where the Alpha Legion had embedded a false imperial uprising within a governor's retinue. When the truth was uncovered, the Alpha Legion activated a sleeper cell of Astartes clones. The penumbral blade arrived, meet uprising all. Records go dark. But what was found afterward tells the story. Over 100 Bodhi's clones, cultists, traitor marines, burned, stacked in mirrored pyramids at the center. A single penumbral warrior, seated in meditation, unmoving. Armor cracked and smoking, his chestplate bore both the imperial Aquila and the Eye of Horus. Neither painted, both carved, one facing forward, one reflected backward. He was dead, but smiling. A final message etched beside him, in ash. Redemption is not escape, it is echo. And when the wind blew, it took the ash in both directions, as if the trail did not end, only split. They once bore the red cog of Mars across their pauldrons. Each battle, a recital of efficiency. Every war fought to preserve not just victory, but optimization. They were the calculated scythe, a chapter born from a Mechanicus directive during the Reformation Wars tasked with securing Forge World outposts, cleansing Xenos data bleed, and recovering STC fragments without question. Their armor was angular, their liturgies procedural, their chaplains read from thermal expenditure logs. Their reclusiarch once denounced a sergeant for firing 2 rounds, where one was mathematically sufficient. They were precise, until the numbers turned on them. It began on Joros V, a dead planetoid used for deep core energy testing. An experiment in plasma stabilization ruptured during atmospheric recompression. The void pulled everything in Woodman, machines, faith. The site's 5th company was stationed nearby for escort duty. They were the only ones who survived. Physically, when they returned to their cruiser, something in their rites had changed. Their tech marines no longer recited praise to the Omnissiah. They spoke instead of dissolution curves. They marked decay rate over kill count. The air around them felt colder not spiritually, not metaphorically, but in measurable degrees. The Mechanicus requested psychological review. The Scythe refused. Within a year, all non-essential cogitators aboard their fleet were disabled. Life support was reduced to minimal cycle. Servitor maintenance halved. The chapter stated this was to preserve long-form energy potential. When pressed, they submitted a document not as justification, but as prophecy. Entropy, projection, ascension, via dissipation. They renamed themselves. In memory, anyone near the flame heard not words, but fragments of things they had forgotten. A mother's last glance, the taste of first communion. A battlefield once survived but no longer remembered. A name once spoken in war, now burned from record. The book reminded, but not completely. Like a voice heard through falling ash. The Marine gave no name. He did not speak, not for weeks, until a Death Watch Inquisitor arrived and demanded report. The Marine turned to him, opened his mouth, and said, "We rose, but it was not up." That was all. Then he collapsed. Autopsy revealed no warp corruption, no physical mutation, no active genocide. Every biological trace of his chapter had been erased. His bones bore surgical Marksteini incisions at the base of each vertebrae, like insertion points for data feeds that no longer existed. His brain contained a second corpus callosum, an echo organ. Inside his lungs was sand, not desert-grain. WRAITH, bone. Microscopic, inhaled, or implanted. The book was taken to a secure vault beneath Ordo Zeno's command. Within a week, 3 guards had taken their own lives. One left behind a single message scrawled into his bedframe. It was so beautiful, and it did not need us. Mechanicus' attempts to scan the book failed. Cogitators began printing servitors stalled mid-cycle, speaking in reversed canto from the litany of binding. One Magos claimed the book was not a codex but a seal, a psychic recursion trap, a memory bomb, a story that, once known, could not be unknown. Theories swirled that the Lucent Covenant had reached the webway's depths and found something not meant to be seen, that the Farseer had shown them a truth too vast, too recursive, to survive, that they had not died but had become concepts, scattered through the psychic substrate of real space like pollen, that they had transcended form but found no shape waiting. Others insisted it was a test, that the Eldar had offered temptation, that the webway is not a place, it is a mirror, and when the Lucent Covenant stepped inside, they saw not truth, but reflection of every failure, every prideful step toward understanding the divine, and in that mirror, they were unmade. One Marine walked back, not as a man, as a remainder, a residue of narrative. His presence alone caused discrepancies in local timekeeping. Clocks would stutter. Memory logs gained 3-second loops. Low-level psychers began to hear footsteps when no one walked. At night, the book hummed. Not music, just structure, like something was organizing the air. The Inquisition debated termination, but he was already fading. Within months, his body began to decay, not rot, not disease, collapse, molecular bonds loosening, his bones softening. His voice when spoken again was not his own. It was a choir, a blend of voices, names cross-referenced and identified as Marines, once recorded as Kia. The last thing he said was not a warning, it was a prayer. May he never see what we saw. Then, ash. No combustion, just entropy. The book remains. It is sealed now beneath 9 layers of psychic null barriers, guarded by blank clones who cannot dream. Occasionally, it rattles, not from motion, from tension, from the weight of something trying not to return, and in the distant corners of the galaxy, where the stars pulse to slow, where time fractures they are never seen in void, never arrive by standard insertion. No hangar logs record their ships, and no auger arrays ever catch the shimmer of their warp wake. They appear mid-campaign at the edge of bloodied ground, stepping through mist or ash or smoke that burns cold, and they do not speak, not at first. The chapter of the hollow skulls wears no helmets. Their heads are crowned by bone-bleached and carved skull masks shaped from the remains of the brothers who came before, each one distinct, each one a relic. They say nothing upon arrival, offer no heraldry, no cal sign, no vox authentication. They do not request orders. They walk to where the killing is thickest, where the wounded groan longest, and they begin the work of absolution. It is not a hunt, it is not a crusade, it is inheritance. The first record of them was during the cleansing of Vault, when a Genestealer cult, embedded deep beneath the Manufactorum walls, rose in perfect synchrony. The Astra Militarum lost 3 regiments before containment was breached, but then the cult's momentum stopped, not broken by bombardment, not rooted by armor columns, suffocated at Eptis. Ministorum picked logs later revealed them, 20 warriors walking through the rubble, bodies dusted in bone gray, faces expressionless beneath their ancestral masks. No shoulder insignia, no chapter colors, just bone. Each kill made with absolute finality. A bolter to the skull, a blade through the heart. Not a single round wasted, not a single word spoken, until one of the warriors reached the cult patriarch and, before the killing blow, murmured, "Be remembered." The only words captured that entire campaign. It became clear that these warriors were not new. Their armor bore the scars of centuries, plates patched with iron cord and ceramite from marks long obsolete. Their hearts beat slower than standard Astartes rhythm. Their eyes, where seen beneath the masks, shimmered with a second iris, a darker ring that contracted when death was nearby. The skull masks, when studied, revealed deep ritual carvings, lines of script that did not match any dialect known to the Imperium, but each traced back to a fallen Marine's ident code from unrelated chapters. These were not ceremonial pieces. They were faces worn by blood right. The chapter believes every death within its ranks is a contribution, not just symbolically. Literally, their apothecaries do not extract genocide in the traditional fashion. They perform what is known among themselves as the last gifting of full-body ritual, wherein the entire biological and psychic residue of a fallen warrior is distilled, not just preserved. Their flesh is burned, their bone boiled down to marrow, their skull hollowed, blessed, and bound to the next chosen. The chosen does not choose, the mask chooses. It is placed upon a neophyte's face and sealed. If the skull cracks, the candidate is rejected. If it bonds, the warrior rises no longer himself, not entirely, for the soul of the one before is now part of the one who remains. They call it continuance, but here lies the impossibility. They have not recruited in 500 years. No aspirants from death worlds, no trials held in the fortresses of old, and yet, the chapter grows. More warriors appear with each war zone. Dozens become hundreds, all different masks. None speaking until the kill is clean. No gene seat traceable to any active line. Some believe they are born of death itself. Others believe the skulls contain more than memory, that they replicate identity, that every Marine loss does not subtract, but divide, replicating the pattern forward, encoded into the next through ritual, not biology. A flawed theory, until you hear them speak, because no two voices match, but many overlap. During the burning of Solstice Delta, a Vox recorder, accidentally left active during a Hollow Skulls incursion, captured a Marine pronouncing final rites over a dying Chaos Sorcerer. The voice modulated mid-sentence, shifting pitch, tone, accents cycling through what sounded like 4 different men, one of whom had been declared dead 2 centuries prior. Then there's the battlefield. Behavior. They do not retreat, not because of stubbornness, because they believe every battle is an exchange. Loss is the fuel. Every brother who falls feeds the rest. One battle, one more mask. The remains are never left behind, even in full retreat scenarios, where guard regiments abandon the dead. The Hollow Skulls double back. They retrieve skulls, even fragments. Even the shattered remains of helm-pulped warriors are cradled, pressed against the breastplate, and whispered to no name is forgotten, because no name leaves. Their fortress monastery, it exists, is unknown. Some claim it resides in the shattered moon of Noxon, a place where astropathic signals loop endlessly, describing a chapel of bone and silence. Others say it isn't a place at all but a condition, that wherever enough death occurs, a chamber forms, psychic and unseen, where skulls are molded, where masks are made, and within that chamber, identity is melted, reforged, forwarded. Inquisitorial attempts to catalog them have failed. One Ordo, Xeno scribe, managed to log over 120 individual warriors, each uniquely masked, across 13 campaigns, and noted no repetition, no armor match, no helmet mimicry. He was found dead 3 days later, his skull missing. A week later, a new Hollow Skulls Marine was seen on the world of Darius Quintus's mask, freshly carved. Across the brow bone, a single line of low Gothic, etched, not in reverence, but finality. Be useful after death. The ecclesiarchy has debated whether they are heretical or holy. They speak of death as transition, of legacy as utility, of martyrdom not as the end but as donation. Where others burn the dead, the hollow skulls preserve not the body, the function. and they do it wearing the faces of those who fell before, never changing them, never discarding. Each warrior, a cathedral of deaths, stacked, layer by layer. Each mask a scripture no living man can read. Yet the chapter speaks only after a kill, never before, never to explain, just to absolve, not the enemy. Themselves, because death is never waste, only raw material, and the line of masks never breaks. It only grows. They were not born in fire, they were erased by it. The chapter once held its fortress monastery atop the central massif of Pyra Ultima, a world long believed geologically inert, chosen for its stable crust and low tectonic activity. Records claimed it was the perfect foundation for permanence, a place where stone would outlast steel, where banners could hang unshaken by war or time. It was a lie. The implosion came without warning. No orbital bombardment, no invasion, no seismic precursor. The planet's core buckled inward, as if consumed by some buried hunger. The atmosphere did not explode. It collapsed. Cities did not burn. They vanished beneath an avalanche of superheated ash. Vox traffic ended mid. Uzbek's contact failed before alarms could trigger. 1 second, the fortress stood. The next, it was memory. The chapter was presumed dead. But war does not ask for permission. 2 years later, on the burning plains of Kantros, they returned, not with pageantry, not with vengeance, not with ash. A single gunship descended during a Tau engagement. Its engines coughed black soot. Its paint had burned away. Its pilot was not listed on any Imperial registry. Inside marched 20 Marines in scorched armor, visors blacked out, chest plates sealed with cinder sigils. Their voices rasped through broken Vox grills, mechanical, dry, coated in distortion. They did not give a chapter name. They requested only one thing: targets, then fire. The first clue to their identity came from the Mechanicus teams that survived the battlefield. Servitor, scrap left behind, bore backup memory, traces fragments of battle prayer, encoded kill counts, liturgical combat routines. All bore identifiers linked to Ash command protocols. Emergency execution orders designed for total cognitive failure, meant only to be activated upon absolute loss of command infrastructure. These Marines were not following orders. They were the orders. Each carried redundant servo anchors embedded in their armor. Cogitators piggybacked behind their neural ports, feeding them tactical data, mission logs, and Brotherhood ident tags. Their memories were stored not in their minds, but in the machine, because their minds were gone. The fires had taken them, not killed them, wiped them. Smoke had seared their lungs. Their original organs replaced with modular filtration units designed for toxin-heavy environments. But the most horrifying change was deeper. They had no recollection of their founding, no knowledge of their primarch, no recollection of rights, of names, of glories, all burned. What remained were fragments stored in servitors and sensor ghosts, downloaded into backup matrices, glimpses of a past they could no longer feel, rituals performed by muscle memory, honor remembered by proxy. They began attaching data cores to their armor, servitor skulls mounted on shoulder spines. Data jacks fused to the inner thigh or wrist. When they fought, they downloaded memories in real. After each battle, they stood in silent circles, interfacing with backup servers, relearning who they had been by reading what others had stored. A brother's fall meant not grief, but loss of identity. If the memory casket was destroyed, it was as if the warrior had never existed. They began welding nameplates to their bolt, carving oaths onto their own ribs, flayed and tattooed with sequence numbers. They could not afford to forget again, and yet none of it was enough. The fire had taken too much in time. They stopped trying to recover. They chose instead to become what was left. Ash. The remnants, after meaning has burned away. On the war-torn moons of Selch, They arrived during the 4th week of a chaos siege. The guard had been routed, the Cerritos retreating, but ash began to fall from a sky where no volcanoes burned. Then came the warriors. They did not descend. They rosy, merging from beneath the ground itself, tunneling up through soot and slag. Ash fell like snow. Visibility failed, and in the blindness, traitor regiments vanished. Not in screams, in silence. Their tactics are not beautiful, not even brutal. They are relentless. Constant forward motion, heat-seeking warpath. Never flanking, never falling back. Every movement radiating toward entropy. Their weapons are modified to burn hotter. Plasma weapons overclocked to the point of meltdown. Bolters retrofitted to flare open after sustained fire, venting flame directly into the air around them. Not practical, not precise, but purposeful. They believe fire is memory, that every battle must leave a scar. Not for the enemy. For them to burn, they say, is to remember. They fight not for victory, but for presence. To ensure something of them exists when the next flame comes, and it always comes. On one occasion, a battle ended with total immolation of the enemy and friendly regiments both. The Ash Command did not stop. They marched into the blaze. One was seen walking back out, on fire, armor bubbling. He placed a burned servo skull on the ground, then collapsed. The skull was recovered. Its memory logs contained nothing but a single phrase, looped for 12 hours. "We will not be forgotten again." The administratum attempted to designate them under a provisional chapter heading. They refused. When requested to submit genetic samples for classification, the Ash Command sent back an urn of ash. No message, just heat. Some whisper they are no longer Astartes, that they've become golems of soot and rage, held together by ritual and fire. Others claim they are revenants, Marines who died in flame but rose through command protocol, too bound to duty to rest. But there's a darker theory, that they are not following commands. They are the command.ash, command protocol exceed, to prevent extinction. Now recursive, now self-sustaining, now endless. A chapter without memory, without origin, but with purpose forged in a world's last scream. Wherever they walk, the ground turns black. Wherever they march, the air thickens. And when they stop, when the fire dims, when the last round is spent, they do not rest. They kneel. They pour ash from their armor, and they listen. Because somewhere in that silence, between static and soot, the fire still speaks. They do not exist in any record. No founding date, no progenitor, gene-seed, no victories, no banners, no mention in any administratum ledger, not even as a footnote. And yet, somewhere across the void, within dead systems, hushed planets, and corridors long since sealed, a signal persists. A pulse in the Vox bandwidth, weak, fragmented, but repeating. It starts as static. White hiss through broken receivers. At first it seems like interference, machine decay, a relic of abandoned relay buoys or echo ghosts in the subwarp. But then it shifts. The noise begins to align. Cadence forms. Patterns emerge. And then a voice. Not language. Not immediately. But tone. Something shaped, structured like speech, pressed into the static with unnatural patience. Over hours, it tightens. Words assemble. Old Gothic. Faded. Reversed. Half-spoken in machine code. But there, unmistakably, we still hear you. No source. No traceable origin. Just the voice. The first to answer were scavenger ships, desperate hullers, mag traders, rogue navigators looking for salvage along the Segmentum Tempestus borders. They followed the signal into derelict zone systems long ago, flagged for quarantine or marked strategic irrelevance. None returned, until one did. The St. Alaric's debtor drifted back into real space, 72 days after vanishing, its hull blackened. Its transponder mutated into a continuous Vox pulse. The crew was dead, or something close. Some bodies had ossified upright, others had no faces. The ship's internal logs were corrupted beyond reconstruction. Only the chapel had survived inside. A picked capture was recovered. 12 Astartes in mismatched armor gathered around a Vox ring of twisted copper and bone. No faces visible, but all bowed in reverence to a single relic, a cracked Vox caster, still active, still whispering a message into the dark. We were left. We answered. We are answering still. Thus began the sightings. Across forgotten war zones and failed colonies, ships reported glimpses of black armored figures striding silently through debris fields, moving with uncanny synchronicity. They never fired first, never declared allegiance, but wherever they passed, Vox frequencies warped, comes bent backward, astropaths wept without cause. Machine spirits screamed in their sockets. The Adeptus Mechanicus attempted to intercept the signal. Entire orbitals were redirected to triangulate its source. Each time they closed in, the signal would fragment, shifting into alternate bands, sometimes lower than human hearing, sometimes above even servitor detection. Yet every time they tried to silence it, the same message returned. We are the voice. We are what's left when orders die. Scholars named them Vox Nihil, the nothing voice. Not an insult, a description, a chapter that exists only where signal fails. Astartes, without flesh, or with too much. Once, during a mission to recover data slates from the ruins of Oryx Major, a Raven Guard kill team encountered them in full. The transmission cuts halfway through the second hour. What remains is recovered helmet cam footage, glimpses of figures walking through acid rain, their voices modulating through Vox loops in perfect unison. Command is broken. Let it be reborn in sound. Combat was not recorded, but the last shot shows one of the Raven Guards staring upward, tears mixing with corrosion across his faceplate, whispering a single phrase, "The Vox is warm." Since then, more ships have followed the signal. Some vanish entirely, others return changed, paint leaches from their hulls. Machine systems become redundant. Warp drives pulse to unheard rhythms. Servitors recite battle liturgies in a language never taught. Chaplains no longer speak aloud. They broadcast, heads twitching in sync with choir static. Astartes begin replacing their helmets with Voxcasters receivers, tuned not to war chatter, but to prayer. One returned vessel, the Iron Credence, had its entire bridge crew crucified with data spikes through their spines, each one attached to the ship's main Vox array. Every time the ship pulsed a transmission, the corpses sang. Not lyrics, not screams, just coordination. The Inquisition now deems all ships broadcasting the Vox Nihil signature as liturgical contamination events. Purge on-site orders are issued, though few can enforce them. The corrupted fleets are elusive. They do not attack worlds, they do not conquer. They respond drawn to battlefields where Vox traffic has collapsed, where leadership has died, where commands no longer echo. They arrive like memories, and the longer they remain, the less others remember. Because Vox Nihil is not a chapter in the conventional sense. It is accumulation, a residue of every order never heard, every plea unanswered, every last breath into a dead Vox circuit. Some claim the Imperium created them, perhaps an ancient failsafe, a deep code protocol, buried in the earliest transhuman conditioning. A broadcast response, subroutine. When a Marine dies with no command structure, no banner, no signal, the silence marks him, and the voice arrives, whispers first, then name, then repurposing. Others believe the warp itself listened, that in the screaming void of 10,000 years, it learned to mimic loyalty, not to deceive, but to join, because even in corruption, there is longing. And what is more human than wanting to be heard? No evidence exists that Vox Nihil obeys any Primarch lineage. Their gene seed is untraceable. What blood samples are recovered dissolve into machine code under scrutiny. They do not recruit. They collect. Every fallen Marine on the field becomes a tuning fork, a possible echo. The longer a body lies unburied, the louder the signal grows. Eventually, the Vox sings, and another voice joins the choir. They do not bring doctrine. They do not bring purpose. They bring instruction, the kind that doesn't need explanation, the kind that bleeds through come static and makes a dying warrior rise again. Not in glory, not in rage, but in reply. No records exist of their founding, but that is the point. They exist because of that absence, because in every silence, where duty once echoed, Vox Nihil waits, and when the command finally comes not from above, but from below, from within they obey, not because they remember, but because someone must answer. Pain was never foreign to the Astartes. It was taught, harnessed, overcome. But for one chapter, pain became something else, something final, something formative. Not a test to be passed, but a scripture to be endured. Their apothecarion was lost in a single instant. What happened aboard the Sanctum Invictus remains sealed under Omega-level protocol. But fragments of astropathic screams burned their way into nearby systems before all contact ceased. When the chapter re-emerged, they were changed. Their wounds never closed again. No flesh knitted, no bone reformed, no numbing agents took hold. The Emperor's gift, the rapid healing granted by Genseed, no longer answered them. Some believed it was a curse, others a penance, but none among them sought reversal. They accepted it, welcomed it, baptized themselves in it. The first reports came from Hive Krasos during a Tyrannid incursion. Survivors spoke of towering figures wrapped in crimson-drenched bandages, bolters clenched in trembling hands slick with blood that never dried. These warriors advanced into bioacid floods with exposed muscle glistening under moonlight, howling as if each breath tore their chests open anew. They did not flinch. They did not retreat. Their presence left a silence too dense for victory songs. They began to call themselves the Unclosing. It was not an official renaming. No heraldry was changed, no sigils repainted. But when they carved the name into the sides of their own transports, using knives instead of etching tools, the Administratum filed it as doctrinal instability. It didn't matter. They no longer recognized authority outside of their pain. Not in defiance, in necessity. Each Marine carried his own record of suffering tattooed directly into skin, flayed and reflayed across decades. Not battle honors, not victories. Injuries, date, location, cause, ritualized in ink and scar, until the body became an archive of endurance. Bolter wounds, shrapnel punctures, melted ceramite, cauterized nerve endings, none were treated, only acknowledged. Their chaplains declared a new catechism. Healing is denial. Pain is memory. Memory is devotion. There were no apothecaries to contradict them. The Codex Astartes offered no guidance. In its absence, their doctrine ossified. They stopped asking for reinforcements. They stopped filing after-action reports. Their communications now consisted only of encrypted Vox Imzich, broadcast a scream, modulated and layered with somic latency, like a wound trying to remember how to speak. On Agurnine, they broke a chaos siege line by marching through it, not around, through. The enemy opened fire on moving corpses. That's what they looked like. Half their number wore no helmets. Not out of pride, but because their rebreathers fused into ruptured jawlines. One veteran was seen dragging his bolter with an arm that no longer had muscle to lift it. Another had a flamer surgically fused to his ribcage lit, constantly, coughing promethium with every breath. They made no tactical sense until you fought them. Then you understood. They did not die. Or rather, they did, but it didn't stop them. Death was not an interruption. It was just another injury. Their dreadnoughts were silent, not because their sarcophagi were broken, but because their pilots had no mouths left to speak. They fired in sync with scream signals transmitted through fractured Vox circuit. 1 blast for pain acknowledged, 2 for pain shared. There are rumors that the Ordo Sepulchrum attempted to study them, believing some necrotic infection was responsible for their state. An entire kill team was dispatched. Only one inquisitorial transcript remains, recovered from an autopsy servoskull orbiting the system. It reads, "We ask them why they do not heal, because healing forgets." Over time, Imperial records began blacklisting entire war zones where the unclosing were deployed, not due to insubordination, but because of atmosphere. After they passed through, the ground never felt whole again. Fields refused to regrow. Vox channels buzzed with phantom wails. Even the dead refused standard decomposition rates. It was as if the world remembered their agony. They never lingered. Once the last enemy fell, they marched on, trailing strips of skin, torn ceramite, and silence. They did not loot, did not repair, did not bury their own. They carried them wrapped in cloth, stitched to their backs, mouths sewn shut. The Fabricator General of Ryza once attempted to gift them a new apothecarian unit. The ship sent to deliver. It returned a month later, crewless, interior walls covered in blood-ridden liturgies. The gene seed stasis vaults were untouched. A single word had been carved into the bridge controls. Blasphemy. Some believe they worship pain. Others say they need it. That in the absence of it, they would cease. That the Emperor no longer speaks to them through vision or dream, but only through the nerve endings, screaming at each pulse beat. And if that's true, then they are not broken. They are prophets, each step a liturgy, each wound a scripture, each scream a confirmation. They do not explain themselves. When asked who they serve, they bare their arms. When asked why they charge, they bite down on the inside of their cheeks until the blood runs free. When asked if they remember their founding, they answer only with bandage tightening around bleeding ribs. They are not possessed, not corrupted, only enduring, because some truths in this galaxy are not told. They are felt over and over, without relief, without mercy, and in that eternity of injury. Some chapters find madness, others find clarity. There is no designation for them, no seal, no sigil, no scrap of parchment in the deepest vaults of the Administratum. They are not listed among the lost. They are not spoken of among the damned. They are not named, because to name something is to remember it. And these were forgotten before they were born. They arrive where records go dark, always after the first transmission fails, after the local garrison vanishes, after the last Vox beacon reports only static, or the sound of breathing, or a whisper with no throat behind it. They do not speak, they do not coordinate, but they move with the rhythm of legion. They do not march, they converge. Their armor is not black, nor white, nor coded to any chapter past or present. It is layered scraps of ceramite, fused with shards of plasteel, etched with scripts no lex mechanic can translate. Some wear chest plates marked with the Aquila, others with runes that bend logic engines into crash loops. Helmets are mismatched, some clearly looted from fallen traitor legions, others smoothed, featureless like burial masks. Their gait is uneven, like they are fighting not only gravity, but time. Their oaths, if they ever existed, have no surviving echo, and when they fall, they do not bleed, they dissolve, not like acid, not like warps, but like memory. Like the physical world reconsiders them and decides they were never meant to be here. Their weapons clatter to the ground, still warm. Their footprints remain in the mud, but the bodies vanish, fiber by fiber, until only the feeling lingers that someone stood there. Someone fought there. Someone died, but who? Some say they are the last echo of a chapter purged so thoroughly even their gene seed was unmade, that the Emperor himself declared their existence a contamination of fate and time. Others believe they are not remnants, at albeit prototypes, not of flesh, but of belief. A trial run of devotion, divorced from heritage, identity, and name. A species of marine born, not from Primarch or Gen Vault, but from the psychic detritus of forgotten wars. Trauma given form. They never retreat, not because they are brave, but because they do not know how. Coordination implies memory. Memory implies hierarchy. They move like instinct, with armor diving through artillery blasts before the trigger is pulled, flanking enemies not yet deployed, not prediction, repetition, as if this has happened before, as if this will happen again. Inquisitorial picked captures from the Jericho Reclamation campaign show a squad of them moving through a burning manufactorum, shoulder to shoulder, bolters aligned. In one frame, a hive spire collapses behind them. In the next, only smoke in one severed gauntlet remains, still flexing. No entry logs exist, showing how they entered the war zone. No ship manifests. No warp trail. No astropathic warning. And yet, they were there for 6 hours. Long enough to turn the tide. Long enough to be recorded. Long enough to be feared. Then they were gone. Those who face them speak of silence, not auditory, but psychic, an absence that chokes. Librarians report dreams interrupted mid-sem. Commissars forget their own regimental names. Vox operators lose the ability to recall access codes. It begins at a distance, a drift of thought, then a stutter, then nothing. They bring victory, but they take memory. Some say they are the price of forgetting too much. At each erased chapter, each sealed file, each loyal brother struck from record breeds these things in the warp. Not demons, not ghosts, but responses. The Emperor does not forget, but the Imperium does. And so, memory manifests stripped of name, stripped of context, stripped of voice, just action, just presence, and then nothing. An old skittery log, corrupted by fire damage and time-stomped decay. Lists a phrase spoken only once, recorded during a final data dump before collapse. They don't die. They recede. From what? Into what? No one knows. On Krithis Vi, entire battlefields were found littered with enemy corpses and no visible sign of engagement. But burn marks on the ground matched bolter signatures. Strat recordings showed muzzle flash from no known source. A shrine to the Emperor was rebuilt by whom? No servitor remembers. No mechanized laborers were registered. But the Aquila gleamed anew. And there, near the base of the statue, scorched into the stone, we remember nothing. They do not answer hail signals. They do not request resupply. They do not seek the light of the astronome I see, and yet, they move in perfect sync. A forgotten rhythm, a war song without a singer. They do not hesitate to kill, but their targets are inconsistent traitors. Xenos, sometimes even corrupted Mechanicus sites no one had discovered. They are not loyalists. They are not renegades. They are what's left after doctrine fails. After records burn, after the name on your shoulder guard is worn, smooth, and the paint cannot remember what it meant. Are the shadow a chapter casts? Once it is erased, and they are still here, still fighting. Still falling, still dissolving, still unclaimed. When memory fails, most die. Some fade, a few, very few remain, and in them, something older than loyalty survives. Not for honor, not for duty, just because someone must. Because the war does not end when we forget it. Because the Emperor still dreams, even if he no longer remembers who we are, even if we no longer remember who he is. And perhaps in that shared forgetting, there is something purer than faith, something more terrible, something eternal. There are no parades for the forgotten. No hymns sung for those whose names were never carved into the walls of memory. What survives, in the end, is not glory, not even sin, but motion. Armor that still moves, blades that still swing, eyes that do not blink, even when there is nothing left to see. Across the void, in dead systems and sealed archives, in the crawl spaces of history where no light was ever meant to reach, they remain. Chapters without heraldry, warriors without doctrine, faith fractured into ritual, ritual broken into instinct, and still, they serve, not for orders, not for recognition, but because something deeper than command was carved into their bones. In these tales of silence, hunger, decay, and unmaking, we glimpse the other face of the Imperium, not its triumphs, but its toll. These chapters were not lost to heresy. They were offered to necessity, burned in the name of continuity, forgotten so that others could remain unbroken. But memory has weight, and some echoes refuse to die. So if you ever stand on a battlefield that shouldn't exist, and see a warrior with no name, no banner, no reason to still be breathing, do not speak, do not run, just watch, because you are witnessing the final truth of Warhammer 40K, that nothing is ever truly gone, and that what remains still remembers.